Hey everyone, it's Angela with FoodStorageAndSurvival.com and welcome to my kitchen. Today is a great day to be here because we are cutting up a deer. This is a little spike mule deer that my daughter got, and we're going to be cutting up the hind quarter. So before we get started, I just wanted to show you what I get out when I'm getting set up to cut meat. Whenever we harvest an animal, it comes home, we're too cheap to take it to the butcher, so I end up cutting it up and getting it in the freezer or putting it in bottles or dehydrating it for jerky. Now this little deer we're going to do in bottles and jerky. I really not a huge fan of deer steak. Some people like it, but we have elk and I like that a little better, so we do a lot of steak out of elk, and the deer we're just going to put in bottles and make jerky out of it. And it's, like I said, it was a little spike deer. There's not a whole lot of meat on it, but still a good amount. All right, so to get started, what I do to my kitchen is I get out my sharp knife and my cutting board, and I cover my counter with plastic, and I just cut open garbage sacks and then tape them onto the counter. And the reason I do this just makes cleanup a lot easier, because then I can lay the chunk of meat right here on the counter and cut it, and when the meat juice, blood, gets all over the place, it just makes cleanup easier. At the end I can just kind of roll up all the plastic and throw it in the trash, and I don't have quite as much. I still sterilize the counter when we're done, but that just helps me clean up a little faster. And then I have bowls out that are just for the various cuts of meat, and this just helps me keep them separate. So I'll cut pieces that I want for jerky, and I know I'm cutting that into jerky, and it goes into the jerky bowl. And then I have some that I'm cutting into steaks or roast or cubing to put into bottles, and that'll go in another one. And then I have a third bowl for scrappy junk, the stuff that I don't want, the stuff that will either cook up and go to the dogs or just go in the trash. All right, you ready to get started? We're going to get this chunk of meat out here and lay out this hind quarter. All right, here we have our hind quarter, and the hind quarter is the part of the deer that has the most good meat on it. The front quarters have a pretty good amount of meat on them, but it's not quite as nice a meat. So the hind quarter is really my favorite part to cut up, just because I end up with more quality meat off of this than off of a front quarter. Down here, okay, so you've got your little joint, your knee joint, and down below the knee joint, this stuff has a lot of tendon in it, so it's kind of hard to work with. It's okay for, sometimes it's okay for jerky or bottling, but anyway, that stuff's kind of hard to work with. Your better chunks of meat are up in this area. So this is the outside of the animal, and this was the inside, and there you've got the ball joint. That was your hip joint. Okay, so the first thing that I do when I'm going to cut up this hind quarter is to just cut the outer layer of the silver skin and fat and stuff off of it. And to get that, sometimes you just go under and then cut along it. We just want to get to where we can see the meat part, and you don't want any of this in the stuff that you're canning or freezing anyway. And I may be overly picky about this. Some people may not bother too much with this stuff, but I really don't like it, which is another benefit of doing my own meat besides saving money, is that I get to decide how much of what I want in it. Okay, so we'll trim all that stuff off. And if you usually when you've, what do you call it, skinned the thing, when you've skinned your own meat, a lot of times there's little bits of hair. Just watch out for those, and I keep a napkin or something nearby and just kind of clean them off and move on and keep working on it. Hey, as you do this, you'll start to see where there's where the muscles come together. And those are going to be places that, yeah, this could be a little sharper knife. those are going to be places that you're going to separate the meat in a little bit. So you get this outer layer off. Okay, so like you can see here how these kind of slide against each other, and that's a place where we're going to get up underneath, and this piece of meat will come off. Yeah, someone could sharpen this knife a little better. That's probably my job. And so that piece will separate from the piece underneath it. Okay, now that's great. This is a good piece for bottling. I'm just going to chunk that up on my cutting board. And I want to get a little more of that off. I didn't quite finish. I was trying to just get on to the next step to show you. Okay, so those are ready to go. Just clean those up. Okay, so they're ready to go into bottles. And that's cleaned up enough for bottled meat. It can take some of this, the silver skin, the tendony stuff. Not a lot though, because it will affect the quality of the meat in your bottles. So I even try and get it off most of that. All right, yeah. We might trade knives here, hang on. See if this one's any sharper today. Yep. All right, let me swap knives. Okay. Turn that over and get this side trimmed up. And if you get underneath, this is kind of why I stab in the middle and then work to one edge and then the other edge, because it gives you some leverage. This stuff's slippery, and so if it's still hooked to one side, it's easy to hold up. And again, as we're going on this top edge of it, top outside side, you can see where the muscles come together. There's a spot right there where they're coming together. And this is just where we're going to look to separate them later on as we cut this up. Once you get that outer stuff cleaned off fairly well, then you can start cutting up, cutting some of these muscle groups off of the bone and start working with them individually. Okay, so, and sometimes you just have to, some of them are quite large, and you just need to cut them into sections to be able to work with them better. And some of them really like to stick to the one next to them, and they don't separate well. So just kind of work with what you've got going. I'm just trying to get this chunk off of the bone here. And see how it wants to separate for the most part at the muscles. So one muscle will want to separate from the other one. And there will be more tendony stuff and silver skin type stuff in here, and you just clean that off you know, as you get your chunk of meat off the bone. And it doesn't have to be perfect. That's the other thing. It's like, you don't have to get it exactly right. If you miss a little bit, it's okay. So this one's actually a separate piece here, and then there's this piece here. And you know, I was saying in this lower section, there's just a lot of that where the muscles are coming together and the muscles aren't very big, and there's a lot of tendon and silver skin in between. So that to me is kind of hard to work with. It's tedious. I still do it, but it does take a little bit more time. Oh wait, that was going to be a bottled meat piece. Okay, so off of that chunk I have this little piece, and we're going to cut some jerky off of that. And I like to cut my jerky with the grain. Some people like to cut it across from the grain. I warm my hand up here just a little bit. We've kept this meat pretty cold. It was been in our outside freezer, and so it's pretty chilly working with it. Sometimes I gotta warm up for a minute. All right. So to cut the jerky, we're just gonna cut thin slices. And like I said, I'm going with the grain. I've got a video, one of my 2-minute preparedness tips, that talks about the grain of meat. So you can go check that out if you want. I'll put a link to it here. And if you do ground meat jerky, then that's going to be a little bit different than this. Okay, when I end up with little bits like that, that are kind of, yeah, they're just hard to work with, those go in bottles. So I just put that over with my bottled meat. And continue this process. So this was a piece of meat for jerky, and that was a piece for the bottle. If you like steaks, you just look at the chunk of meat that you cut off of the bone and say, hey, that looks like a steak. So I'm going to pause here. I'll get you one that looks, some of that, a lot of that's going to be jerky meat or bottled meat. If I wanted some steak, I'd either get it off the back strap, which is a whole nother piece of meat that's off of the back, or this piece right here will give you good steak. And in here is the bone. I mean, you're going to run into the bone here. And you just cut along the bone when you get there. Separate the meat from the bone, meat from the joint. And sometimes the muscle wraps around and you got to work from both sides on it and flip your piece over. And there's the bone from this side. Okay, now it's a chunk of meat right there that we can, again, trim the silver skin stuff off the outside. And it will cut into some nice steaks. If you like roast, you can get roast out of these pieces. The hind quarter is a great place to get roast meat from, because there's just larger pieces of meat that you can work with. Like I said, I really don't want roast or steaks out of this, but I'm just showing you where you can get it from if you do. I'm just looking for jerky and bottled meat, which are really, really easy to find because you can get those even out of smaller pieces. This silver skin stuff, it just cooks up really tough. It's tendon, and so it doesn't help the palatability of the meat to leave that on there. That's why I trim off as much as I can of it. All right, so that, and that's, I mean, it's a large piece. There are separations in it, but you can just cut that into chunks and make it into, and you've got a little roast, or you can slice it across the grain and make steaks. And like I said, I mean, this is me, so I'm going to trim up all of this silver stuff and get it off because I really don't like it. You maybe don't have to get so crazy about it. Some people don't. It's kind of like the fuzz on your corn, you know, the silk. I got to have all that off. And my kids, they don't care so much, but I really like to have mine off. Okay. So this is going to make me some more jerky. And as you're cutting, if you run into that silver skin, you can actually cut and kind of feel the resistance when you get to it and stop there. And it'll kind of separate itself. It's pretty easy. Once you get going, you'll get a feel for kind of how it works. You just really can't be afraid to get your hands dirty and really get into grabbing the meat and, you know, really get a feel for it. If you're squeamish and don't want to touch it, then it'll be a lot harder to feel it, you know, to know what you're doing by feel. Again, more jerky, and if I end up with meat that's a piece that, you know, is a little too thick for jerky or a little too small, and I just put that in a bottle and bottle it and use it for dinners. Bottled meat is awesome. If you've never bottled meat, that is a good thing right there. And this, like I said, this was my daughter's deer. She shot this one, and so she actually requested that we make a bunch of jerky with it. And so that's what we're doing. For the most part, it's going to be jerkied. And in your jerky, okay, so right here, up this piece of meat, you can see it here. Up this piece of meat here is some more of that silver skin stuff, or a tendon, if I wanted to cut in there and separate. And that's just going to be a chewy spot on the jerky if I continue to cut it there. And so I'm actually going to cut up to it from the side now. And then this one's kind of obnoxious to work with, so I'm going to cube it and put it in bottles. Okay, this is maybe kind of hard to see. Maybe we should finish cutting this off. I know you came here to spend half hour in my kitchen. Appreciate you. Once the meat is off the bones, then you'll just have bones and meat. You can get rid of the bones and finish processing the meat. I'm cutting it into little pieces or chunks, or steak or roast or whatever it is that you want. You can get the meat off of the bone. That's a big part of it. Just feeling like you've accomplished something, and then it doesn't look like a leg anymore, it just looks like pieces of meat. And we're just going along where the meat wants to separate from itself, where the muscles come together. And then where it connects to the bone, sometimes that tendon gets fairly thick, and just gotta trim it off and be kind of careful. Don't stab yourself. Okay, this is that part that I told you that I'm not a huge fan of. This is, yeah. We still cut it off and work with it, but. Hey, here's your bone on this one. You can actually see it on the bottom end of the leg. It runs along the outside. And so you can start at the bone and cut that meat off. I've got it all off the bone. I can actually just move this board over. You can see a little better. Nice. So this is all the meat that we're working with, and then what I've cut off already. And I just continue to go through it a piece at a time, trim it up, clean it up, and figure out what I'm doing with it. This one here is going into bottles. I can tell just by looking at it. It's going to be just a little small for jerky. You could do fajita meat or stew meat or something like that out of these little pieces as well if you don't want to bottle meat. All right, we've got that hind quarter all cut up. We've got meat in the blue bowl here for jerky and some meat to bottle, and I'm just going to package that up and wait till I get some more so that I've got enough to fill a canner worth of bottles, and then we'll bottle those. And the jerky is probably ready to get going on getting that cured and seasoned and put in the dehydrator. So thanks for joining me. This was cutting up a deer hind quarter with Angela from foodstorage-and-survival.com. Thanks, we'll catch you next time. Bye.